Imagine a world where the most powerful machine ever conceived by humanity is not a super collider or, a starship engine, but a filing cabinet.
The filing cabinet.
A towering, labyrinthine bureaucracy where world-changing ideas are not debated, but simply filed away.
Yeah.
Indefinitely. This isn't some dystopian novel. It's our reality since 1971.
Right.
We've been living under a collective agreement to fear progress more than we desire it. We celebrate these tiny incremental gains in the digital realm while treating the physical world, the world of atoms, like a museum we're too scared to touch.
We've convinced ourselves that scarcity is a virtue.
Exactly. That using less energy is some sort of moral victory. But then you talk to an engineer, not a politician, not an activist, but someone who deals in the raw, unforgiving laws of physics.
Their whole mindset is different.
Completely. Their eyes don't glaze over at words like megawatt or terawatt. They light up. They'll pull out a chart showing you a single pellet of nuclear fuel, smaller than your fingertip, and tell you it holds more latent energy than a ton of coal. They'll describe a future of such staggering, abundant power that it just sounds like science fiction.
But then the other shoe drops.
And then, almost in the same breath, their expression will harden. They'll point to a different set of documents, regulatory filings, thousands of pages long, environmental impact statements for projects that will never be built, legal challenges measured in decades, not years.
That's the whiplash.
That's the whiplash, the dizzying gap between what is physically possible and what is politically permissible. We stand at the threshold of a universe of limitless energy and intelligence, whispering excitedly about the future, while a single, rusted lock forged from fear and bureaucracy holds the door shut.
That whiplash is exactly the central tension we have to explore today. I mean, when you really dig into it, the largest constraint on human advancement isn't technology. We have the blueprints. It is entirely philosophical and institutional.
So the capacity is there.
The technical capacity is there to solve energy scarcity, to solve so many of humanity's longest-standing problems, but we have built institutions that actively resist the exponential progress that physics allows.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is clear. We're going into the economics and philosophy behind what people are calling the Great Stagnation.
Right.
We need to understand how this institutional fear of technology translates into, hard numbers on our civilization's timeline. Then we'll get into the ideological war being waged over this future, the rise of effective accelerationism.
And finally, the geopolitical fight.
And then wrap with the geopolitical contest for technological autonomy, what we are calling sovereign compute.
To start, we have to recognize that this problem has a date. There's a marker, the 1971 fracture.
The 1971 fracture.
That year is cited over and over again as the point when civilization just slammed on the brakes. Specifically, the world of atoms, physical engineering, large-scale infrastructure, high-density energy, it entered what you could call an induced coma.
Induced coma. What does that look like in practice?
It means that while progress in the world of bits, the digital, the computational, the software layer continued its exponential leap. Moore's law.
The phone in your pocket being 1,000,000 times more powerful than a 1970s computer.
Exactly. That's bit progress. But the physical infrastructure supporting our lives fundamentally stalled. The speed of tunneling, the cost of building new bridges, the energy density of our power plants, that is atom progress. And it is governed by policy and regulation, not physics. And after 1971, it just became too politically and legally difficult to build large-scale physical infrastructure, which forced all our societal growth, our excitement, and our capital into the digital realm.
That distinction, atoms versus bits, that really puts our current struggle into a sharp historical frame. We've kind of outsourced our ambition to software.
We have.
So to quantify the price of this institutional friction, we have to look at the ultimate measure of technological ambition. The Kardashev scale.
The Kardashev scale, which was conceived by the Soviet astronomer Nikolai Kardashev back in 1964, is this magnificent tool because it classifies technological advancement strictly by the amount of energy a civilization can harness and use.
Energy defines destiny.
It absolutely does.
Okay, so let's quickly refresh the definitions for everyone, starting with the first big milestone, Type I.
Right. A Type I civilization, sometimes called a planetary civilization, can store and use all the energy available on its home planet. That's benchmarked at about 10 to the 16 watts.
And that's everything. Solar, wind.
Everything. Every joule of energy harvested from solar, wind, geothermal, fusion, fission, any other planetary source you can imagine. Achieving this means you've basically transcended material scarcity on a planetary scale.
Then we take a leap into the astronomical.
A huge leap. That brings us to type 2, the stellar civilization, which consumes 10 to the 26th watts. This civilization controls all the energy released by its parent star.
So this is the Dyson sphere concept.
That's the classic example. A Dyson sphere or a swarm capturing a significant portion of the sun's total luminosity, which is about 4 times 10 to the 26th watts. I mean, capturing even a fraction of that is an unimaginable engineering feat.
And then there's type 3, the galaxy controllers.
Type 3 civilization hits 10 to the 36th watts. This entity controls most of the energy generated by the entire galaxy. You're talking about utilizing the raw power of supermassive black holes, manipulating entire star systems, operating on a scale that makes our current technological base look like, a high school chemistry set.
It's humbling. So, using Carl Sagan's continuous K formula, which kind of puts this on a sliding scale, where are we right now?
Based on global energy consumption data from 2018, where the world's total energy supply was approximately 1.9 times 10 to the 13 watts, humanity is calculated at K equals 0.728.
0.728.
So we're an adolescent civilization. We're nearing planetary maturity, but we're still fundamentally constrained by resource limits.
So close, and yet so dependent on finite resources and, as we've said, politically restricted access.
Yeah.
So if we removed all constraints, if physics was our only master, when would we hit type I?
Well, the early optimistic projections, the ones using simple exponential growth that assumed we'd just keep accelerating, were quite aggressive. Michio Kaku suggested type I status within 100 to 200 years. An unconstrained model predicted the year 2347.
2347. That's the theoretical potential if our institutions kept pace with our ingenuity.
If. That's the big word.
But as you said, the whiplash is that policy has created this deep friction. So what happens when we run the calculation based on the policies we actually have in place?
And that is the critical finding here. When you run the detailed constrained model, the one that factors in current binding international policies, specifically those driven by climate mitigation targets, the date for reaching type I civilization is pushed back significantly.
To when?
The best estimate is the year 2371.
2371. That is a philosophical statement in a number. That means policy has effectively added a quarter century, 24 years to the timeline for planetary maturity.
It has.
Why are the policy constraints so distant? What's the main driver there?
It all centers on the global energy transition model that's required to meet climate goals, the one set by organizations like the UNFCCC and the IEA. To meet these targets, the model assumes that global fossil fuel consumption has to peak in 2030 and then execute a rapid, aggressive decline to reach near net zero by 2050.
And that rapid decay phase is what creates the thermodynamic friction. It forces this massive, almost impossible compensatory effort from non-fossil sources.
Exactly. The required decay rate for fossil fuels between 2030 and 2050 is breathtaking. The annual reduction starts at around 2% in the early 2030s, but it has to accelerate drastically, reaching almost 40% annual decay by 2050 to hit the net zero target.
40% per year.
Per year. We are talking about an institutional commitment that requires the global energy system to pivot tenfold in 2 decades. A policy requirement that seems, almost impossible to enforce without severe economic shock.
So if fossil fuels are being aggressively taken offline, the burden falls entirely on nuclear and renewables to not just maintain power, but to drastically increase global energy supply to continue growth toward type I.
And the IEA's ideal split for this gap filling was about 2/3 from renewables, solar, wind, and so on, and 1/3 from nuclear. Renewables are making progress, but nuclear, the high-density bedrock, is the real challenge.
The sources show a historical rate of nuclear growth and then a dramatic slowdown. Can you walk us through what happened in that data?
Absolutely. Historically, between 1971 and 2018, nuclear energy maintained a pretty respectable average growth rate of 7.53%. This was the age of rapid build-out, driven by the ambition of the 60s and early 70s.
But then
You look at the more recent constrained 20-year period from 1998 to 2017, and the average annual growth rate plummeted to a mere 0.50%.
Less than 1%.
Just over 0.5%. This collapse is the quantifiable evidence of that institutional friction we talked about. The policy paralysis around permitting, licensing, and public opposition that made building new nuclear power stations almost impossible in advanced economies.
And the required growth rate now has to be far higher than that recent average to support the transition.
It does. Even using a prudently chosen idealized scenario, what the IEA calls its safety data sheet or SDS condition nuclear, still needs to achieve an average growth rate of 2.47%.
So from 0.55 to 2.47, that's a huge jump.
It's an immense lift, especially considering the last 2 decades only saw a 0.5% increase. Achieving a sustained 2.47% growth rate over the next 3 decades, while dismantling fossil fuel infrastructure is a monumental task. It really highlights that the policies driving the 2371 timeline prioritize environmental and risk avoidance over the raw technological acceleration needed to climb the Kardashev gradient.
That puts the Type I challenge into such stark relief. The institutional fear outweighs the technological opportunity. And this philosophical choice pivots us directly into the ideological war being waged right now, the battle between EACCs and Decels.
This is where the physics meets the politics. The underlying tension driving that 2371 timeline is this conflict between the decelerationist, or Decel view, and the effective accelerationism, or EACC view.
Okay, let's start with the Decels. This movement seems rooted in a deep skepticism, if not outright hostility, toward growth itself.
That's a pretty accurate summary. Decelerationists advocate for degrowth and actively slowing down technological advancement, especially in powerful new fields like artificial intelligence.
Why? What's the core fear?
Their fear is often existential. They believe technology, particularly AGI, is likely to spin horribly out of control, and that our only responsible course of action is to stop or severely limit its progress. They are the standard bearers of safetyism, seeing growth and high-energy use as inherently destructive or oppressive.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. What's the strongest, most rational argument for the Decel position? What risk are they correctly identifying that maybe the other side dismisses too easily?
That's a fair question. The rational core of the Decel view is the genuine, non-trivial risk of unforeseen consequences in complex, rapidly developing systems, the unknown unknowns.
Right.
They point out that a system like AGI, which can recursively self-improve, presents a risk profile unlike any technology before it. The Decels argue that pausing or slowing development gives us time to build reliable institutional guardrails to ensure that once AGI is created, it is irrevocably aligned with human values. And that is not an easy philosophical or technical problem to solve quickly.
That makes sense as a caution, but the EACC critique of this mindset is that it's strategically dangerous. Right.
Precisely. The accelerationist critique is twofold. First, they view Decel philosophy as fundamentally pessimistic, almost Malthusian. Second, they argue it's strategically naive.
How so?
If responsible advanced economies slow down their development of AI, they simply create a power vacuum. Bad actors, whether rogue nation-states or small adversarial factions, will ignore the self-imposed slowdown and race ahead. They'll gain an irreversible, dominant advantage over those who are trying to be careful.
So the EACC view is that the Decel approach actually empowers bad actors.
Yes, they'd say it's effectively a tool for evil that empowers centralized, unchecked control by those who don't care about safety.
Which brings us to the counter-narrative. The effective accelerationism, or EACC movement. This is a fundamentally techno-optimist movement.
It absolutely is. EACC is rooted in the belief that stagnation, that 1971 fracture, is a kill-all scenario. The only perpetual source of problem-solving and societal survival is technology, and therefore progress must be accelerated without limit. Their aim is explicitly to climb the Kardashev gradient by maximizing energy usage and leveraging what they call the techno-capital machine.
Let's break down the 4 core goals of this machine, because they really define the civilization they're trying to build.
Okay, the first goal is foundational: increase energy capture. This is primarily through clean, high-density sources like advanced nuclear fission and eventually fusion. This energy is a raw fuel for everything that follows, especially computation. You just cannot have AGI without planetary scale power.
And the second goal focuses on making sure that technology isn't immediately centralized by just a few powerful players.
That's right. Increase pro-growth investment and decentralization. They see open source AI as a vital mechanism for distributing technological power widely, preventing the kind of centralized corporate or governmental control that the Decels might, inadvertently create.
A decentralized global technological sprint, not a restricted oligopoly.
Exactly.
The third goal is the big one: AGI.
Create artificial general intelligence as quickly as possible. They view AGI as the ultimate universal problem solver. And you shouldn't think of AGI just as a better chatbot. Think of it as an engine capable of solving complex physical problems that human intelligence simply can't grapple with quickly enough.
like protein folding.
A perfect example. If human teams can solve a major protein folding challenge in a decade, AGI could potentially do it in a day. That level of acceleration fundamentally changes the timeline for solving everything from climate change to disease.
And finally, the escape from terrestrial limits.
The fourth goal is to develop technology to become a multi-planetary species through space industrialization. This rejects the zero-sum thinking that's inherent in scarcity-constrained terrestrial politics and seeks to unlock the near-infinite resources of the solar system, making our planetary resource limitations irrelevant.
But let's address that crucial defense you mentioned, the liability argument.
Yeah.
If they're racing so fast, how can they guarantee safety better than a centralized regulatory body?
It's a very elegant market-based defense. EACC proponents argue that market forces are actually the most effective safety mechanism.
How does that work?
If a tech company releases an AGI system or a self-driving car or an advanced medical AI that causes harm, the liability, both financial and legal, would fall directly on that company. This enormous risk incentivizes companies to conduct extensive, rigorous testing and ensure their systems are safe and aligned, often to a higher standard than slow-moving, politically motivated regulatory bodies.
The speed of the market demands immediate responsibility.
In their view, yes.
And we saw this ideological tension play out dramatically at OpenAI in November 2023.
That OpenAI flashpoint was a perfect real-world crystallization of the EACC versus Decels struggle. A faction of the board, motivated by safetyism and a desire to slow the pace of deployment, tried to oust Sam Altman, who is a leading EACC proponent.
And the backlash was immediate.
The near-unanimous employee and investor resistance, which culminated in Altman's reinstatement, was widely celebrated by accelerationists as a defining victory for the technological imperative. It was a declaration that rapid progress will not be stalled by fear.
It really redefined AI development as the main battleground for humanity's trajectory. Now let's pivot from the philosophy back to the physically engineering possibilities that this EACC mindset champions. We're talking about energy superabundance in practice.
Right. If we discard the institutional constraints, the goal isn't just efficiency, it's raw abundance. We need to move beyond simply replacing current fossil fuel usage and toward an order of magnitude increase in power availability, making consumption limits totally obsolete.
So how do we quantify true superabundance? Is there a number?
There's a practical working definition we can use. True superabundance means a society can sustainably command 40 kilowatts per person.
40. How does that compare to now?
To give you some scale, the U.S. currently runs at about 9.2 kilowatters per person. Iceland, which is already an outlier because of its high industrialization and cold climate, consumed 20.5 kilowatters per person in 2019. Superabundance means doubling even Iceland's rate.
So power is so plentiful you don't even think about it.
You don't worry about turning on the lights, running the AC, or charging your VTOL taxi. And it's worth noting, and this is a powerful data point for the stagnation thesis, that U.S. per capita energy consumption actually peaked in 1979 and has been flat or declining ever since.
That correlation between the 1971 fracture and the 1979 peak in energy use per person is damning evidence for the stagnation argument. So what technology is the bedrock for hitting 40 kilowatt per person?
Nuclear fission, without a doubt. It is the only high-density, zero-emission source that operates today with an unmatched capacity factor around 92.5%.
Meaning it's always on.
It provides reliable, non-intermittent baseload power. The problem was never the physics of nuclear. It was the scale and cost of the legacy plants and the ensuing regulatory quicksand.
And the modern solution to that is modularity.
Exactly. Small modular reactors, or SMRs, these reactors are designed to be mass-produced in a factory, trucked or shipped to a site, and deployed near the point of use. This changes the economic and regulatory calculus entirely.
So instead of a massive one-off project,
instead of a multi-decade, billion-dollar bespoke civil engineering project, you have a product that can be deployed rapidly and affordably. And we already have the proof of concept. NASA and the National Nuclear Security Administration developed a 10-kilowatt prototype reactor for less than $20 million, demonstrating that high-density, miniaturized power is possible.
So SMRs are the key to decentralized, abundant power. Once energy is unconstrained, how does that fundamentally change the way we travel?
Transportation becomes one of the greatest consumers of this new, cheap energy. We have to first account for something called Marchetti's constant.
Okay, what's that?
It's the observation that humans average about 1.1 hours of travel time per day, consistently across cultures and history. Faster travel modes don't necessarily reduce the time people spend commuting. They simply allow people to expand their range.
So if your commute gets faster, you just move farther away.
Exactly. If you can commute 350 miles in the same 1.1 hours you used to commute 35, you increase the total distance traveled, and consequently, you massively increase total energy use.
So abundance means faster, farther, and much more energy-hungry modes become routine.
Absolutely. You see an expansion of high-energy density transport. VTOL air taxis are a prime example. They are incredibly energy-hungry on ascent using distributed electric propulsion, but they bypass ground congestion. They enable the growth of massive exurbs and dramatically increase total passenger miles. Their convenience justifies the massive energy cost when power is cheap.
And what about high-speed ground transportation like Hyperloop?
The Hyperloop aims for 700 miles per hour by using magnetic levitation and reducing air resistance in a near vacuum tube. While it's very efficient once it's at speed, the infrastructure cost is immense. It's totally dependent on cheap, high-speed tunneling technology like what the Boring Company is developing.
But with cheap energy, it's feasible.
When energy is virtually free, the engineering challenge of operating thousands of these tubes becomes feasible, connecting cities hundreds of miles apart into a single metropolitan area.
Then there's the ultimate expression of energy utilization, suborbital travel.
Suborbital point-to-point travel using technologies like Starship is the most energy-intensive leap you can imagine. Rockets taking you from LA to Sydney in under an hour.
The energy cost must be astronomical.
It's a staggering expenditure of energy. A single conventional 747 flight might use, say, 2,000 megawatt hours. A Starship flight doing the same route, relying on powerful rocket boosters, could easily use 40,000 NRW-HUP. That's a 20-fold increase in energy consumption per trip. If abundant power makes even a fraction of long-haul travel shift to this mode, total global primary energy usage just skyrockets toward Type I status.
The vision of a 40 kWh person society seems almost inherently wasteful by today's standards. But the point is that when energy is cheap, that wastefulness is a sign of freedom, not scarcity.
That's the mindset shift.
Let's look at how superabundance transforms material production and agriculture.
Agriculture undergoes this massive shift from being land and water constrained to being purely energy constrained. Vertical farming is the perfect example. Indoor facilities trade every traditional input soil, sunlight, rain, vast fields for a massive, constant input of electricity for artificial lighting and climate control.
Growing leafy greens indoors is relatively easy, but what about staple crops? Things like wheat or rice.
That's where the energy requirement becomes astronomical. If you only grow lettuce or herbs, the energy cost is manageable. But growing staple crops indoors requires immense energy density. Even assuming an improved efficiency rate of, say, 30 kilowatts per kilogram of yield.
Which is optimistic.
Very. Even with that, if we were to grow all global wheat and rice indoors to maximize food security and quality, it would require double the current global electricity production.
Double everything we produce now, just for those crops.
That's the scale of energy supply that a Type I civilization demands.
This intense, energy-driven manufacturing leads us to a fascinating long-term possibility: a carbon shortage. Can you explain that concept?
Right, it sounds paradoxical, but when energy drops to near zero cost, say below 2 cents per kilowatt hour, it makes these highly energy-intensive processes like direct air capture and synthetic material production economically competitive.
Okay, give me an example.
Take concrete. Normally, quicklime production releases massive amounts of CO2. But you can manufacture synthetic quicklime using seawater, water, and electricity.
So we replace the CO2 release from mining and heating limestone with a pure energy input.
Exactly. The process uses about 2.5 megawatt hours per ton of quicklime and is carbon neutral. It even becomes carbon negative as the concrete naturally absorbs CO2 over its lifespan. The same concept applies to plastics. If abundant electricity is available, you can manufacture high-quality polymers from air and water.
If these processes become widespread and economical, what's the cumulative effect on the atmosphere?
Well, they could sequester carbon on an industrial scale, especially if industries currently reliant on fossil feedstocks shift to synthesis. If, for instance, global plastic consumption hit 3 billion metric tons per year, the industry could cumulatively sequester all current global emissions over 150 years.
So the long-term implication is profound.
Future generations might face a carbon shortage. They might have to shift policy entirely, moving from taxing carbon release to taxing carbon removal just to maintain enough atmospheric carbon for plant life. This is the ultimate paradoxical vision of a high-energy, post-scarcity world.
That transition from climate anxiety to a carbon shortage just illustrates the magnitude of the EACC vision. Now, let's pivot to the immediate geopolitical consequences of this technological race, the battle for what's being called sovereign compute.
The rules of global power are changing very, very quickly. We are entering an era where computational power is the new strategic national asset. It is the new oil.
Right.
AI is fundamentally an industrial process that transmutes electrical energy into cognitive output, and that's measured in FOPS per watt. Control over that conversion chain is rapidly becoming the key determinant of national power.
What does that control hierarchy look like today? Who's on top?
It creates a new digital hierarchy. The language of AI sovereignty is invoked by almost every nation, but really only the US and China possess anything near full-stack control.
Full-stack control,
meaning they control the entire vertical. Yeah. The advanced chip design, the high-end fabrication, even if it's outsourced. The US controls the tooling, the hyperscale cloud infrastructure, and the leading AI enterprise models.
So for most other countries, the promise of sovereignty is just a marketing term.
It's the sovereignty shell game. You see companies like NVIDIA actively promoting their $60,000 chips as enabling sovereign AI. But this is a paradox.
Sovereignty is for sale.
Sovereignty is for sale, but the supply chain remains external and subject to the export controls and geopolitical whims of the US. A nation might own its data and its models, but if it relies on imported chips or externally hosted cloud infrastructure, its technological autonomy is fundamentally compromised.
And the physical anchoring of the cloud is the key to this leverage, a lesson learned years ago through some big legal challenges.
That's right. The Microsoft Ireland case in 2018 was a landmark realization. When U.S. prosecutors demanded access to data stored on Microsoft servers in Dublin, it dissolved the myth that the cloud is this ephemeral, non-physical space.
It's just someone else's computer.
It's just someone else's computer, in a specific building, in a specific country. Data is physically anchored, and that location dictates legal and political jurisdiction. Control over the physical infrastructure, the data centers, and the energy that feeds them gives nations tangible leverage.
This realization has spurred major strategic investments, especially in medium and developing nations, to secure their own autonomous compute capacity.
The strategic imperative is to secure localized high-density energy infrastructure to power domestic, often open-source AI development. For many, open-source models are seen as a necessary cognitive Second Amendment.
A Second Amendment.
To safeguard national autonomy and ensure that the AI models reflect local languages and cultural priorities. India's Bharat initiative is a key example of fostering this kind of localized AI.
And this is where the SMR discussion converges with geopolitical strategy, leading to that intriguing story we found about the Sovereign Compute Initiative in Northern Europe.
This is a perfect illustration of proactive geopolitical acceleration. We saw an account where a government minister, just frustrated by the pace of bureaucratic delay, bypassed the established grid connection process entirely.
And the UK grid queues can stretch for a decade.
A decade or more. So this minister authorized the co-location of a fleet of small modular reactors directly adjacent to a new state-backed data center. This immediately solves the massive, reliable power demand necessary for big AI training runs.
The SMR data center fortress. It's a declaration of digital independence, bypassing the institutional sclerosis of the old energy grid.
Exactly.
What strategic advantage does this modular approach offer these nations?
Speed and resilience. Modular data centers themselves are tactical solutions. They offer rapid deployment. We're talking 12 to 20 winks versus 18 to 24 months for a traditional build.
And the power is just as modular.
By pairing them with SMRs, the power supply is equally modular, secure, and resilient against external energy shocks. And furthermore, this approach allows nations that are currently resource-constrained to quickly secure essential compute capacity using currently available hardware, hedging against future inevitable export controls on the most advanced chips.
It's an urgent tactical solution in this accelerating AI race.
It is.
So the geopolitical map of the 21st century is being redrawn based on this infrastructural power.
Yeah.
How would you classify the tiers that are emerging globally?
You see a clear stratification. At the very top are the full-stack sovereigns, so the US and China, who control every element from design to enterprise. Beneath them, you have the partial-stack sovereigns, think the EU, Japan, South Korea. They have strong elements, often in enterprise software or specific fabrication processes, but they remain dependent on the giants for core chip hardware or deep cloud infrastructure.
And what about the rising powers trying to assert themselves?
Then you get the middle power strategists. India, parts of the Middle East, Southeast Asia. These nations are leveraging strategic positioning, targeted investments in open source AI, and infrastructural innovation like that SMR data center co-location to achieve constrained but meaningful autonomy. They're actively fighting dependence.
And at the bottom.
Finally, you have the computationally subordinate countries, which have extremely limited negotiating power. They often rely entirely on foreign-owned hyperscale cloud infrastructure and imported models, leaving them highly vulnerable to geopolitical leverage. The message is clear. The future belongs to those who master the interplay of planning laws, clean power, and sovereign capital to build computational power.
That brings us full circle to the very first image we introduced. The filing cabinet. All of this potential, the 40K person society, the Type I civilization, the sovereign compute fortress, is held captive by the institutional and regulatory obstacles that define the Great Stagnation.
The challenge remains that rusted lock of bureaucracy. Let's go back to that engineer who was tasked with digitizing those archives, the one dealing with the fading ammonia-scented blueprints for a molten salt reactor.
A design from October 1970. Safer and potentially far more efficient than the pressurized water reactors we struggle to license today.
The tragic irony is that she's spending her days navigating mountains of regulatory compliance forms for the NRC. She's managing decay, fighting paperwork, instead of building the future of infinite cheap energy that's described on those blueprints. This anecdote fundamentally shows that she isn't fighting physics. She is fighting a philosophy of risk aversion that was rapidly codified into law just before the regulatory freeze of the early 1970s.
And that institutional sclerosis isn't just a historical footnote. It defines infrastructure paralysis today.
The data is inescapable. Consider the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC. Since its creation in 1975, the NRC has never approved a new reactor license from initial application all the way to the start of operation. Never. This regulatory environment didn't just slow down fission. It effectively outlawed it in the United States for decades.
And it affects every large-scale infrastructure project, paralyzing our ability to build the very systems we need for abundance.
Absolutely. Think about transportation, another core area for advancement. The high-speed tunnel connecting D.C. and Baltimore, a critical piece of infrastructure that could cut travel time significantly and increase efficiency, is just languishing in environmental review.
And this isn't because of a technical challenge.
No, not at all. It's due to process accumulation and the ability of veto players to weaponize environmental review to create decades-long delays. This regulatory paralysis is what EACCs refer to as cost disease.
This slow-motion institutional decay is tied directly to the ideological break we mentioned, the precautionary principle.
Right. The precautionary principle mandates that if a technology carries some hypothetical, unproven risk, you must prove it is completely harmless before deploying it. Accelerationists view this as a form of societal suicide pact. They argue that it sacrifices near-term human advancement like clean nuclear power, life-saving medical AI, abundant food for abstract, unquantified fears.
They argue that by preventing the deployment of world-saving technology, the bureaucratic machine is committing what they call statistical death on a massive scale.
That is the core of their political critique. And they demand a radical intervention. To seize the potential for superabundance and AGI, policymakers must treat AI compute infrastructure as a critical national priority.
What does that mean in practice?
They argue for radically streamlining infrastructure permitting, going as far as abolishing legislation like the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, which they claim is the primary legal tool for paralyzing infrastructure, and mandating the direct co-location of clean power, specifically SMRs, with compute centers.
This all hinges on a choice. Do we accept the scarcity paradigm dictated by institutional fear, or do we ignite the future that physics allows?
The philosophical urgency is really captured by that anecdote of the coder, viewing the heat generated by his GPUs not as wasted energy, but as necessary friction. He views the constant hum of the cooling fans as a prayer for a post-scarcity world.
Because he believes that conservation and efficiency are merely mechanisms for managing poverty, and the only path to true abundance is through the technological acceleration that his machines are enabling.
And that perspective defines the stakes. The debate between EACC and Decels is not abstract. It determines whether humanity achieves the material condition of a Type I civilization, realizing a world of superabundance powered by cheap, clean energy and hyper-intelligent systems, or whether institutional decay and philosophical fear condemn us to perpetual struggle under manufactured resource constraints, forever locked at K equals 0.728.
That is the whiplash recalibrated. We are standing between a physical reality defined by limitless, high-density energy, the engineer's vision of type I, and an institutional reality defined by scarcity, safetyism, and delay. That projected 2371 timeline. The greatest competition in the 21st century is not between nations or companies, but between the exponential speed of technological creation and the glacial speed of institutional change.